Welcome to the deep dive. Today, our deep dive is looking at a topic that, you know, sounds pretty sociological on the surface, but we're going to treat it almost like an engineering challenge. We're talking about community, but not as this sort of abstract social option. We're talking about community as essential architecture. We've been digging into a really powerful stack of sources that frame historical Black community networks as this critical survival infrastructure, a kind of deliberate parallel system for risk management, for health, and for building power.
Okay, let's unpack this, because when we say architecture, that's a very intentional word choice.
Right.
It signals that these were parallel systems built out of, well, sheer necessity. They weren't just social clubs. They were built because the mainstream systems, economic, healthcare, legal, were often unsafe.
Or just flat out inaccessible.
Exactly. Were designed to be extractive. So
Okay.
this deep dive is going to show the really practical benefits then, and why building similar systems today is, frankly, one of the most urgent tasks we face, especially with social isolation on the rise everywhere.
And that foundation of necessity is really where the whole story starts. If you look back at the historical context, slavery, Jim Crow, the Great Migration community wasn't some nice to have.
No, not at all.
It was a matter of life or death. It was the only safety net.
That's it. And the organizations that grew out of that were just phenomenal. This wasn't just neighbors helping each other out. It was formalized infrastructure.
Like what?
Well, think about burial societies. They sound like they were just about funerals, but they were so much more. They were actually early forms of life insurance.
So a way to stabilize a family after losing a breadwinner.
Precisely. They were a form of banking, a way to keep a family from collapsing. And those mutual aid networks, the benevolent societies, the sort of informal, we take care of our systems, that was the bedrock of economic stability.
Right. And then woven right into that, you have the Black church.
The church.
Yeah.
Your sources really hammered this home. It was so much more than a place of worship. It was the civic control center.
The hub.
It was everything. It was providing literacy, it was managing food and housing aid, offering childcare, and it was the central spot for political organizing. A true 360-degree institution.
What's fascinating, too, is how the sources bring in groups like fraternities and sororities. I think today a lot of people see those as purely social or collegiate.
Yeah, that's a common view now.
But historically, they were these highly organized engines for, well, practical benefit.
They were organizational genius. They were designed specifically to pool resources, to build a stable professional network, and to create leadership pipelines in a world that was, inherently hostile.
They were actively building community capital.
Exactly. Which brings us to the real question for you, the listener. How does that history connect to right now? We're past the formal structures of Jim Crow, so why does this pattern still matter so much?
That's the key question.
It matters because the underlying condition, that systemic inequality and access to protection, to wealth, to institutions that actually respond to you, that hasn't fully disappeared.
Right.
So if you're still facing structural exclusion, community becomes your practical, high-value risk management tool. It's the backup generator you have to run when the main power grid is just not reliable for you.
I think that framed community as a risk management tool, that makes the modern urgency so clear, especially when you layer in the social connection crisis that's happening right now across the U.S.
We absolutely have to talk about that crisis because the data is just striking. The CDC reports that nationally, about 1 in 3 U.S. adults feel lonely on a regular basis.
1 in 3.
And maybe even more concerning for, just basic stability, about 1 in 4 adults lacks any real social or emotional support.
That is a massive deficit, and the sources show that this lack of social architecture has real physical consequences. It's not just a feeling.
That's the aha moment on the medical side. The U.S. Surgeon General's advisory on loneliness is crystal clear on this.
And what does it say?
It says that strong social ties are associated with significantly higher odds of long-term survival. We're talking about meta-analytic data that reports something like a 50% higher survival odds for people with strong social connections.
50%.
50. That's not a small number.
No. That moves social connection out of the mental wellness category and puts it squarely into physical necessity.
Exactly. And if we apply that to the source material you shared, the role of the Black community as a protective buffer, it becomes even sharper. When someone is facing higher cumulative stress.
From what exactly? Let's break that down.
Well, from discrimination, from the constant exhaustion of workplace code switching, from living in a neighborhood with disinvestment, from unequal health care, all of it.
And code switching is a perfect example. For anyone listening who hasn't heard that term, it's that constant draining effort of changing how you act, how you look, how you speak, just to fit into a dominant culture.
It's a performance, and it is incredibly taxing. It leads to chronic stress. And what the community provides is a space where you don't have to do that.
It's a recovery space.
It's a recovery space. It provides emotional support, sure, but also practical help. And crucially, it provides earlier intervention. People in your network notice when you're starting to slide, physically or mentally, before it becomes a catastrophe. It's preventative medicine.
Which brings us to this really interesting tension. Because if that protection is still needed, the sources point out that a lot of the traditional anchors that provided it are changing.
They're changing, absolutely.
And that makes building replacement networks even more vital. Take the Black church. As we've said, it was this durable civic institution. But Pew Research shows participation patterns have really shifted. About 4 in 10 Black Americans now seldom or never attend religious services.
And that's a massive shift. But here's the nuance that we have to add. Among those who do attend, even a few times a year, a big majority still attend predominantly Black congregations.
So where those institutions exist, their role as a community and identity hub is still incredibly strong.
Incredibly strong. But the universality, that's what's changed. The church used to be the default hub for everything. As it becomes less universal, especially for younger generations, the responsibility shifts.
To what?
To intentional community building, secular groups, online groups that become offline groups, hybrid models. You can't just rely on the default networks to do that heavy lifting anymore.
This is a great transition because it takes us from community as just a safety net and moves us into community as a full-on power grid. And here's where it gets really interesting. We start to see community as a mechanism for advancement. It's information power, it's economic power, it's civic power, it's how you find a job, it's how you learn the unwritten rules.
It's the transmission network for opportunity. And we're seeing this architecture adapt, through digital means. Pew found that Black social media users are way more likely to say these platforms are important for political engagement and finding like-minded people. The architecture is innovating.
But, and this is a big but, the sources are very clear. Digital connection is not a full substitute for real-world ties.
Not even close.
So what are we losing when we prioritize the digital over the physical?
We lose durability. We lose the ability to actually show up for someone. I mean, the data on social isolation shows that across the board in the U.S., we're seeing fewer clubs, lower trust, fewer close friends. You can't build real trust through follower counts.
You need people who know your face.
Know your face, know your kids, know your history, which ties directly into the importance of place, right? Community isn't abstract. It's neighborhood safety. It's getting a lead on an apartment when the market is tight. It's especially urgent in areas facing disinvestment or limited public services.
That local network is the difference between managing and being overwhelmed.
Completely. And that brings us to maybe the most overlooked function.
Right.
Community as a vital force for identity reinforcement, for meaning.
Why is that so important?
It's critical for mental stability. I mean, think about it. If you are constantly operating in a world that misreads you, that applies stereotypes, that forces you to edit yourself, community is the only space where you can be, quote, accurately seen.
And affirmed without having to explain yourself.
Yes. And that is profoundly stabilizing. It supports mental health. It helps you parent effectively when the outside world advice just doesn't apply. And it allows for real leadership development because you're not spending all your energy just proving you belong.
So this whole deep dive, it's shown that community is this robust system designed for multiple roles at once. And instead of separate benefits, they're all woven together into 4, let's call them functional pillars.
I like that. 4 pillars.
So the first pillar, care and resilience. This is the immediate mutual aid stuff. A little cash to get through the week, a ride, a meal, childcare, crisis response.
Then the second pillar, health protection. This is what we quantified. Reducing isolation, seeing depression or anxiety earlier in a friend, having someone to keep you accountable.
Third pillar, economic advancement. This is the upward mobility engine, the job referrals, the real mentorship, the patronage of businesses that keeps capital inside the network.
And the last 2, which are linked. Civic leverage and meaning. Leverage is that coordinated voice that can actually influence schools or city hall or a workplace policy. And meaning is just that deep sense of belonging, the traditions, the joy, the reinforcement of who you are.
So if we pull it all together, we see that community for Black people has always been organized around these 4 things happening at once.
Yeah.
care, protection, advancement, and meaning.
And that brings us right back to the present moment. The challenge now is that the whole country is suffering from an epidemic of isolation. And at the same time, those legacy hubs that used to manage this are less universal,
What you mean?
which means the build it on purpose approach, that intentional construction of parallel systems, is more vital now than, I would argue, at any point in the last century.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? Is community really is this essential architecture for risk management, for health, for advancement? If it's a necessary power grid, then we have to be intentional about it. So our final thought for you to chew on is this. Considering how essential this architecture is, what intentional structure or network are you supporting or helping to build in your own life today?